Ethereum 2.0 is coming next month and it's super exciting. It's been delayed many times, but this time it's really happening. So Ethereum is going to become way more scalable and it will also offer an opportunity to earn some passive income with the yield of up to 10% annually. In this video, I will show you how you can become a validator in Ethereum 2.0 by staking your Ether. I will cover how the staking mechanism works. I will give a detailed step-by-step instruction for how you can run a validator node. I will also show you how to stake your Ether by depositing it into the deposit contract. And we will do all of this both on the Mainnet Testnet to train ourselves and on Mainnet where the real stuff happens. What I'm going to show you is a little bit technical, but not too much. So we won't do any real programming. It will be just a bunch of commands to execute in your terminal. You can just copy and paste. So don't be too scared. Anybody can do it. You don't need to be a programmer. There are other ways to stake your Ether most simply though by using services like Staker and Rocket Pool. So with these services, you just use their graphical interface and they do the staking for you. The big disadvantage is that first you need to trust that these services will stake your Ether properly, and second they take their cut, so you don't take as much as if you stake it by yourself. So we are going to do the staking the hard way, but it will be more rewarding at every level. And if you don't know me, I'm Julian, and on my channel Eat the Blocks I teach DeFi and blockchain development. And before we continue, if you're a beginner and you want to get started in blockchain, I'm going to do a free live training on November 27th. Is going to cover how to get your first blockchain job, how to launch your own blockchain project, and how to make money programmatically in blockchain. So it's going to be a live event where you can ask me any question and there will not be any recording available after. So if you want to participate, the only way is to register for the event with the link down below. This is totally free. You only need your email in order to register. So before we dive into the step-by-step instruction of how to run a validator and stake your Ether, I want to give you a high-level overview of how staking works in Ethereum 2.0. So first, there is Ethereum 2.0, which is the next version of Ethereum, which is going to be way more scalable. Vitalik Buterin said that by combining Ethereum 2.0 and a layer 2 scaling solution, we could go up to 100,000 transactions per second. That's really huge. The way Ethereum 2.0 achieves high scalability is by splitting the data of blockchain into different parts that we call shards. In order to connect shards and validate transactions, there is another chain called the beacon chain. On the beacon chain, the consensus mechanism is not proof of work like on Ethereum 1, but instead it's called proof of stake. With proof of stake, the equivalent of a miner is a validator. The job of validators is to validate pending transactions. Each validator needs to invest 32 Ether. This is what we call staking. If a validator validates an invalid transaction, it is slashed, meaning that it will lose a significant portion of its stake. If a validator goes offline, it receives a penalty by losing a portion of its stake, but this penalty is smaller than in the case of slashing. If a validator validates a correct transaction, on the contrary, he earns some Ether. This reward Ether is created by the network. So it does create some inflation, but it's moderate. The more Ether is staked, the less the reward per validator, and conversely. There are some websites that help you to calculate your staking reward. So how can you become a validator? You need to do several things. First, you need to run a validator and a beacon node. These are two separate processes. You also need to stake 32 Ether per validator, which is about $15,000 at the time of recording this video. To stake this 32 Ether, you send your Ether to a smart contract on Ethereum 1, which is the current Ethereum network. So this smart contract is called the deposit contract. When you send your Ether to the deposit contract, you also specify a public key which is associated to your validator node. That's how we can establish a relationship between the staking deposit on Ethereum 1 to the validator nodes on Ethereum 2. Very important to note, once you send your 32 Ether to the deposit smart contract, there is no way of going back. You can't withdraw your Ether from the smart contract to Ethereum 1 This is a one-way operation. The only way to get your Ether back is on Ether 2. And even on Ethereum 2.0, you won't be able to withdraw your Ether right away. You will need to wait until phase 2 of Ethereum 2.0, which will probably be released in about 2 years. So you have to be okay with this commitment. Okay, so moving on to the beacon chain. So the beacon chain constantly scans for new deposit in the deposit contract. When it finds a new deposit, it activates the account of the associated validator, and from this moment, it expects the validator to validate transactions 24/7 and will apply penalty and reward depending on the behavior of the validator. Okay, so now you understand how staking works. Next, we are going to do the first step of staking your Ether, which is to run a beacon chain node. There are several software for running a beacon chain node, but the most popular one is the multi-client of Prism. So we're going to choose this one. Before staking on Mainnet, it's better to train yourself on a testnet. So we are going to use Pyrmont, the testnet of Ethereum 2.0, which is connected to Goerli, one of the testnet for Ethereum 1. The procedure is almost the same for Mainnet. I will explain the differences later in this video. As a side note, Pyrmont was introduced recently to replace another testnet called Medela. In the future, it's possible that Pyrmont might be replaced itself by another testnet. So if this happens, the instructions of this tutorial will probably still apply 100%, except that you will need to change the flag of the testnet when you start the beacon chain in your terminal. So this is the instruction for running a Prism validator on the Pyrmont testnet. First, we need to install the Prism multi-client. So there are different methods. You can install Prism directly with a script. You can use Docker or you can build it. But the easiest solution is to use the installation script. So that's what we're going to do. So Prism can be installed on Windows, Linux, and macOS. However, there are a couple of system requirements. So you need to have 8 GB of RAM and 20 GB of available space. So that's the minimum specification. But if you can, it's better to meet the recommended specification. So 16 GB of RAM and 100 GB of storage. And of course, a good internet connection. So for the demo, I'm going to do everything on my laptop, but when you run this in production for Mainnet, it's actually better to do it on a server. Why is that? Well, it's important to understand that you need to keep your validator online 24/7. Every time it goes offline, you will lose some money because you will receive a penalty. So your laptop is not really ideal to run any software 24/7. A server is much better for that. There are a couple of hosting providers you can use to provision a server. I personally recommend DigitalOcean because it's very simple to use. So creating a server on DigitalOcean is outside the scope of this tutorial, so I will skip this part, but just be aware that when you provision a server, you can choose the hardware specification, so make sure that it's compatible with the recommended specification of Prism. And when you provision your server, you will also have to choose which operating system to use. I recommend to choose the latest version of Ubuntu. Okay, so we're going to install Prism. So I'm going to select the instruction for macOS. So first, we're going to create a directory for Prism. And second, we're going to download the install script and make it executable. So we just copy everything. So you need to have install curl. So that's a utility in order to do HTTP request. Okay, so now we have the executable here. Okay, so the next step will be to get some Test Ether on the Goerli network. So here in the documentation of Prism, they tell you that you can get some Test Ether by going to their Discord server. But I prefer to use another faucet at this address. It's a bit more simple. So which Ethereum address you're going to put? So for that, you are going to install MetaMask, which is a very popular wallet for Ethereum. So you can find it in the Chrome Web Store. This is a Chrome extension. And once you install it, it's going to create a couple of addresses for you. So you can just pick the first one. So for example, for me, the first address is this one. So I'm going to copy it. And so after you go to one of your social media and you post your address, you tweet it, and then you copy the URL, and you go back to the faucet, you put the link, and here you select 35 Ether because we need at least 32 Ether to do the staking. Okay, so we're good. So the next step will be to run your Beacon node. So here, if you scroll down, you'll see the instructions. So I go to Mac OS. And so here you can see that to run your Beacon node, you will need to have an endpoint to Ethereum 1. So we're not going to run our own Ethereum 1 node because it's a little bit too difficult. But instead, we're going to use Infra, which is an API for Ethereum. So with Infra, you don't have to run your own Ethereum node. You use the API. So you can create a free account. And after, you can create an Ethereum project. And they will give you a couple of endpoints for the different networks. So we're going to select Goalie and I'm going to select the HTTPS URL. Okay, I'm going to paste this in my notes. So back to the documentation of Prism, and we're going to copy the command to run our Beacon chain. And then in our node, we're going to paste this and we're going to replace the part that is the URL to the Ethereum 1 endpoint. So that's what we got from Infra just before. Okay, so we copy this. Then back to a terminal, you paste the command, press enter, and it's going to start the Beacon node. And then you just have to let it run until it's completely synchronized with the Pyrmont testnet. It might take between 10 to 20 hours. So if you are like me, you're trying to run it on Mac, it's possible that you have an error because of a missing library called JPG. So in this case, you can install this library with brew, install JPG. And if you don't have Brew installed, then you need to Google this and install it on your Mac. This is a package manager for Mac. The next step is to deposit 32 ETH on the deposit smart contract on the Goalie testnet. So for that, you will need to check the documentation of the launchpad for the Pyrmont testnet. Go to continue. So then you need to acknowledge that you understand that your deposit of 32 ETH is a non-reversible one-way transfer. So in this case, this is just a testnet. We don't care. But when you're going to do it on Mainnet, it's important to understand this. You'll only be able to get back your 32 ETH in 2 years when phase 2 of Ethereum 2 will be implemented. You also need to acknowledge the fact that you understand it's important to keep your validator online and updated if you don't want to be slashed or penalized. Yeah, I accept. So then you need to acknowledge that your mnemonic phrase will be the only way to withdraw your funds. So you will see that later we will generate 2 public and private key for the validator. So here, same thing, it tells you need to be careful with these keys. Yeah, so here it tells you that you will need to wait before you're able to withdraw your Ether on Ethereum 2, so that's what I was telling you just before. It's the same thing. They tell you need to be committed. This is for the long haul. And finally, they tell you that there are risks because you are an early adopter. So just to be clear, if something totally catastrophic were to happen for phase 0 on Ethereum 2.0, I'm pretty sure that they would do a hard fork of Ethereum in order to restart the process because this is super important. So I accept. And finally, you click on continue. So I just want to make sure that you know all of these things. So here they tell you that you need to run an Ethereum 1 node in parallel. So in our case, we're using Infra, but I think we still have to choose something. So we'll just choose guest. Continue. Then for our ETH2 client, we're using Prism. Okay, so here we click on continue. How many validator we want? So we want 1 validator. And my current operating system, well, this is Mac. Okay, how do you want to run the CLI? Download CLI app. Okay, so then we're going to download this from GitHub. So this app will allow us to generate the two pair of public-private keys that are required for our validators. One of these pair of public-private key will be used to identify our validator on Ethereum 2, and the other pair will be used to withdraw our 32 ETH stake. So let's scroll down. And here you need to download the correct version for your operating system. So for Mac, this is Darwin. Then you also have a version for Linux and a version for Windows. Okay, and after in your terminal, you're going to uncompress this file. So I'm going to use the command tar-xvf and then the path to the compressed archive. If you don't have tar on your computer, if you're on Mac, you can install it with brew. Okay, so now we are going to move the uncompressed folder to the folder where we are running Prism. Okay, so now let's go to this folder. And after back to the website of the launchpad for Pyrmont, and we scroll down, we're going to find the next instruction. So that's the instruction to generate the two pair of public and private keys. Go back to the terminal and we go in the folder of the CLI. Oh damn, I have two versions here. Okay, probably there's an old one. Oh, let me remove the old one. Okay, so now we're good. You pass the instruction and it's going to execute the deposit executable. Okay, so we need to choose the language for the mnemonic phrase from which our two set of public-private key will be generated. So let's say English, and the password that secure your validator key store. So choose whatever password you want. They want 8 character. Okay, so I'm going to copy paste this in my notes. So of course, when you do this for Mainnet, make sure to handle this very securely, because anyone who has this will be able to steal your 32 Ether on Ethereum 2. Okay, back to the terminal, press any key and please type your mnemonics. I'm just going to paste what we have in our note, creating your key, and the keys were created in the validator keys directory. Great. Okay, so now let's go back to the launchpad to see the next instruction. Okay, so we continue, and after we need to drag a file that we just generated. So here I am in my Prism folder and I go in validator keys, and what we need to drag and drop is deposit data.json. So the sensitive data is in key store, so this actually encrypted. So it's why you need to remember your password. And in deposit data, that's going to be the input data for the deposit smart contract on Ethereum 1. So it's going to contain a very important piece of data, which is the public key that identify your validator. So that's how the deposit smart contract is going to associate your deposit with the correct validator on Ethereum 2. So we drag and drop this. Okay, and we click on continue, then connect wallet. Click on MetaMask. I'm going to select the first account, but I don't think I am on the correct testnet. Please connect to the Goalie testnet. Yeah, that's correct. So here connected to the Goalie testnet in MetaMask, and we can see our 35 ETH. Okay, so 35 Goalie ETH available. Then continue. Okay, scroll down, proceed with caution. So here you just tick the different boxes. Okay, click on continue. Okay, so initiate the transaction. So here we can see that we're going to send 32 Ether to the contract, and we click on confirm. And then we can track the transaction on Etherscan Goalie here, and it's confirmed. Great. Okay, so back to the launchpad and we click on continue. And that's the end of the process to stake our 32 ETH. So here we can see a couple of statistics. So total staking balance for the whole network on Goalie and how much we added, and what's the launch threshold. So actually before November 24 of 2020 on Mainnet, we need to reach this amount of Ether stake in order for Ethereum 2.0 to get started. And if this fails, we don't know yet what's going to happen, but probably that there's going to be a fork of Ethereum and that another launch of Ethereum 2.0 will be planned later, but I'm pretty sure we're going to reach this threshold. So for the next step, we're going to run our validator node. So for that, we need to first import the validator accounts into the validator node. So the validator accounts, that's what we generated just before with the CLI. So here we scroll down and we will find the command in order to do this. So let's go in our node, going to paste this, and we need to change this a little bit. Okay, so now in my terminal, and I want to know what is the path to my validator key. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, so then we copy this back to the terminal and we paste the command, press enter. Oops, wrong directory. So I need to go to the root here, Prism. Okay. Try again, and this time it's working. So now I'm going to press enter for the wallet directory. Then I need to create a password. Okay, it's a bit picky for the password. Okay, after I need to put the password for my validator account. That's the password that we used previously in the previous section. Okay, so now the validator accounts are imported in our node. So next we need to run our validator. So we're going to copy this instruction and we run it in our terminal. And it's going to ask us the wallet password. Oops, wrong password. And now our validator is running. So after, you need to keep open the terminal window with your validator node as well as for your Beacon Chain node. And you need to wait between 5 to 12 hours after you make your deposit on Ethereum 1 before your validator is activated. And that's pretty much it. So what I've shown you is for the Pyrmont testnet, but what about for Mainnet? So the instructions are almost exactly the same, except that when you run your Beacon Chain node and validator node, you don't specify the Pyrmont testnet for the network. You don't need to specify anything. Mainnet is the default. Also, when you use the launchpad of Ethereum, this time it's launchpad.ethereum.org. It's not prefixed by the name of the testnet. So what about node maintenance and monitoring? Well, there are a couple of things you can do. First, in order to make sure that your Beacon Chain and validator node stay online all the time, you can use a tool called systemd. And for monitoring, you can use two other tools called Prometheus and Grafana. So this is a bit outside the scope of this tutorial. So if you want more details on this, you can check out this article. Okay, so maybe you have tried to run a validator on the Medalla testnet, but you are still not sure about investing 32 Ether to become a validator on Mainnet. So at the time of recording this video, 32 Ether is roughly equal to $15,000, and it can be quite a big commitment to stake this amount, knowing that you won't be able to get your Ether back before several years when phase 2 of Ethereum 2.0 will be rolled out. It's actually possible to pull some money from several investors to stake some money on the same validator. So in this case, you don't need to invest the whole 32 Ether by yourself, but you can just invest a part of it and let other people provide the rest. And in the next video, it's exactly what I'm going to show you. Check it out.